All right, everyone, so welcome to class. I am going to go ahead and welcome our guest speaker here, and you're going to see his short bio in the chat room as well, but please, I will email you his longer bio. Alan Salazar has been a traditional storyteller, Native educator, Native American monitor / consultant, a spiritual advisor, a traditional paddler and builder of Chumash, Tomols, canoes, which are also known as canoes, a preschool teacher, and a juvenile institution officer. More importantly, Alan is a respected Tataviam Chumash elder whose family's ancestry has been traced to the Chumash village of Ta'apu, now known as Simi Valley, and the Tataviam village of Chaguayonga, near Castaic, California. Okay, where is that the Magic Mountain area? Yes. And so his ancestors were brought into the San Fernando mission starting in 1799, and he still continues to actively protect his ancestors' village sites and tribal territories. So he's very active. To learn more about Alan and the amazing work that he engages in, please visit www.mynativestories.com. So I'm going to hand it over to Alan. Thank you again for sharing us, for being here with us for session number 2. Thank you so very much. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, and everyone just be ready for discussion in about 15 minutes, okay? All right, welcome, Alan.
Thank you. I'm Alan Salazar, Pazekva Kashin. I'm Alan Salazar. I'm from the village of Pazekva, now known as San Fernando, California. Let me make a few comments that I learned from the first group. One, this group is much better looking than the first group. I'm just kidding. Don't tell them that. Actually, I told them the same thing. But the first group was a great group. They asked about 50 or 60 questions. So anything less than that, I'll be disappointed from you guys. So, but I'm sure it won't affect your grade at the end of the semester or however that works. Let me tell you a little bit more about my family. I get my tribal Chumash Tataviam ancestry from my father's side of the family, and my father's side of the family is from San Fernando. I was born in San Fernando. My father was born in San Fernando. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, most of my older cousins, aunts and uncles were born in San Fernando. And they were born there because of, as your teacher mentioned, starting in 1799, my ancestors were brought to the San Fernando mission. So my four greats grandparents helped build the San Fernando mission and were part of the slave labor workforce at the San Fernando mission. One of the unique things about the San Fernando mission, and I'll give you an example, Ventura mission, Santa Barbara mission, La Permissima, Santa Ynez, so the missions along the coast and going north of here, brought in one tribe, Chumash. San Fernando mission, where it's located in the town of San Fernando, brought in 3 tribes, or people from 3 different tribes. And when they did that, we started intermarrying. So it's not unusual for tribal people that recognize as Fernandino, F-E-R-N-A-N-D-E-N-O, Fernandino, because we're brought to the San Fernando mission. Fernandino, most modern day Fernandino tribal people have Chumash and Tataviam, or Chumash and Tongva, or all 3, Chumash, Tongva, and Tataviam. My family, we know we have Chumash and Tataviam from the village of Tuapu, in the village, which is a Veterano, and we know we have Tataviam from the village of Choyanga, which is near Castaic. Magic Mountain is built over it. We probably also have Gabrielino. My great-grandfather, Antonio Maria Ortega, was the last native speaker in my family, and he was fluent in a Gabrielino Tongva dialect. So we know we also come from a village that's considered Tongva Gabrielino, but we're just haven't got a lot of research on it yet. So I identify mostly with my Chumash and Tataviam ancestry, and that's how I identify. If you look at me, I would have a hard time convincing any of you that I'm English. But I got up this morning and I had a cup of Earl Grey tea like I do almost every morning. My mom is mostly Portuguese, English, and about 4 or 5% here and 5% there of various European ancestry. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. I do these programs for me. If you guys get a little bit out of it, that's great. And so you can ask your teacher. I'll give some of the same information I did the first group, but because I do these programs for me, I'll share some things with you that I didn't share with the first group. And please, I hope you sit down and talk to some of the students in the first group and say, you know, what did he bring up? He brought up that he grew up in Hanford, California. I didn't bring that up to the first group. When I was 2 years old, we left San Fernando, where my tribal family is from, and we moved to Hanford, where my mom is from. This is significant because I'll talk a lot about what you're having this class for. In 1953, I was 2 years old, and we moved to Hanford, California, where my mom is from. I said my mom is mostly Portuguese and English. And my mother and father in the 1950s and early 1960s were one of the few, there might have been 3 or 4 that I can remember, but they were one of the few interracial couples. Now, this is before the civil rights. So my father was not very well liked in Hanford, California by most of the people in Hanford, most of the Portuguese and English farming families. And I tell people at a very early age, when I was like 5 or 6, 7 years old, definitely by 7, I knew who liked my father and who hated my father. And no one ever told me, we like your dad, we hate your dad. No one ever told me that, but I knew who did and who didn't by the way they looked at him, the way they talked, the way they greeted each other or didn't greet each other. I knew which one of my mom's family members hated my dad and which ones liked him. My father raised all of his kids, me, my brothers and sisters, to be proud of our native heritage. Back then, the term was Indian. He raised us to be proud of our Indian heritage. On my birth certificate, it says Indian. To show you how unusual that is, my grandmother, I have a picture of my grandmother. Hold on a second. My grandmother was born in 1898. You can't tell too much, but here's a picture of my grandmother. You can't tell that much from that picture, but you can tell by looking at me. My grandmother was about a shade darker than I am. My grandmother was a very dark brown woman. On her birth certificate, she was born in 1898. It says Caucasian. And the reason it is most poor families, especially poor families of color, they did not question authority. So my grandmother was born in a hospital in San Fernando, California, and whoever filled out the birth certificate looked at the family and said, okay, they're not Negro, which was the term back then. They're not Negroes, Caucasian. They didn't go ask. They just filled in the blank. My father made a point of finding the person that filled out the birth certificates when all his kids were born. My sister was born in 1942. It says Indian. My brother, 1947, Indian. My sister, who only lived 3 days, Glenda, Indian. Me, Indian. My little brother, Indian. That was very unusual for the 40s, 50s. My little brother was born in 1961. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that people started asking people what ethnic background they are. What do you want on your child's birth certificate? So that was very unusual. In 1957, I was 6 years old. This will be on the test, so be sure to remember that. In 1957, Mr. Salazar was 6 years old, which means I was born when?
1957.
1957, I was 6.
Oh, so you were born 1951?
51. That will be on the test too. Anyway, there's no test. In 1957, the only tribal people that me and my older brother, my brother's 4 years older than me, the only Indian people we saw on television, one, there was only like 3 stations, ABC, NBC, CBS, that was it. You'd watch 3 TV stations. You didn't have a lot of choices. Being little boys, we liked watching shows about frontiers and westerns. And unlike most little boys at that time, we always cheered for the Indians. And there were 2 shows, Davy Crockett and the Daniel Boone. They were frontiersmen, and they were fighting the French, the English, and the Indians. And the Indians back on those shows were the Iroquois, the Mohegan. They had Mohawk haircuts. And the mean warrior Indians had Mohawk haircuts and tomahawks. And they were bad. They were bad. I'll just leave it there. And so I wanted to be like that as a little boy. And in the summer of 1957, me and my older brother go to Pop. We go, hey, can we get Mohawk haircuts when school's out? My pop said, yeah, sure. We go to the barber. Hanford, California has, at that time, had about 10,000 people. And if any of you lived in small towns, you know small towns know, everybody knows everybody. So everyone knew who we were because my mother and father were one of the few interracial couples. And we went to the barber shop on Main Street, Hanford, California, 1957. I got a mohawk. My brother gets a mohawk. My father gets in the barber's chair. The barber says, take a little off the side, trim at the back, Abe. He goes, no, give me a mohawk. All 3 of the Salazar boys, that's me on right there, walked out of that barber shop with mohawk haircuts. 1957. That was before Martin Luther King. That was before any sit-ins. That was before even the term civil rights was being used. That was a bold statement to make. That's when I knew when people were staring at me and where people were glaring at me. And trust me, we got glares. How dare we be proud of our Indian heritage? That's something you're supposed to hide. And my dad put it right in everybody's face. This brown man was married to a white woman, and he is a mean Indian. He was also a Marine, so he solved many problems with these. There were a few times we had to go bail Pop out of jail because he got in a fight in a bar. That was my Pop. That's the way we were raised. So let me share some things that I didn't share with the other group. Misconceptions. I did mention the other group. I hate labels. Don't put a label on me. I don't even care if it's a good label. All Chumash men are extremely good looking. I don't care. Don't label us. There's a few ugly ones out there. I don't know who they are, but there are. So when we were young and we were the only interracial couple in Hanford, we got labeled. And it's kind of ironic. American people that are prejudiced sometimes aren't the sharpest tools in the shed. And we were, as you can see by that picture, we were Indians and we were proud of it. And we weren't going to back down from anybody. In fact, the whole story is shortly after we got our Mohawk haircuts, we went to Mass. And the Padre the week before had pulled my father aside and told him, Abel, the men that come to Mass usually wear suits or at least a nice dress shirt with tight dress pants and nice dress shoes. My father didn't own a suit. My father didn't own a tie. He didn't own dress shoes. We had 2 acres. We had horses. We worked in construction. He worked with these his whole life. So when he went to church, he wore his nice Western shirt, his good cowboy boots, and we wore our good Levi's, not the faded ones, the Levi's that were still dark blue. And that's why the Padre had told him, Abel, all the male parishioners usually wear a shirt and tie and slacks. So we go to Mass after we got our Mohawk haircuts. My pop is in his nice Western shirt, his good blue Levi's, and his good cowboy boots. And we walk into Mass, and he goes, Alan, find us a place in the front. And we sat in the front row. The Padre did it, start at Mass the same way every Sunday. He would come in from the side. He would go, the altar boys would be in front. And then he would walk up to the podium. And the first thing he would do is he would turn his back to the parish and he would bless Jesus on the cross with holy water. And after he blessed Jesus on the cross with the holy water, then he would turn around to greet everyone that was at Mass, the parish. When he turned around that Sunday, in the very front row was little Alan Salazar with a Mohawk haircut. No shirt and tie, a nice Western shirt. Next to me was my brother. Next to my brother was my sister, my mom, and on the end was my pop in a nice Western shirt with a Mohawk haircut. And as you saw by that picture, where is it? There it is. My father was a mean-looking Indian. That's what the Padre had to look at for the whole Mass. My sister said you could see smoke coming out of his ears. He was mad. When we left the church, the Padre turned away, hoping Abel and his family would just walk on by. But my father walked up to him, and the Padre had to turn and look and acknowledge Abel Salazar. And he put his hand out. My father grabbed his hand. My sister knew Pop was going to say something to him, because my Pop was a Marine. He fought in World War II in the Pacific, Okinawa and Saipan, two of the worst battles. Thousands and thousands of men on both sides died in Saipan and Okinawa. My father survived those two battles. My sister knew Pop was going to say something to the Padre. When the Padre put his hand out, my father grabbed his hand and squeezed it and pulled him close to him. And he said, Padre, when I come to Mass, I come to ask for his forgiveness and for his guidance, not yours. Once again, that was a bold thing to do. That's the way I was raised. I was raised to be proud of my native heritage. I always have. I've been actively involved with my native tribe, trying to save the culture, paddling and building traditional canoes. I'm extremely proud that I'm one of a small group of probably less than 100 Chumash people that have helped revitalize the maritime culture. I've paddled in all the historic crossings. And I'll talk about that in the second section and give you a history of the Tamals, a little bit more history of the Chumash and Tataviam. But that gives you a little insight to how I was raised. I want to share a story and then open up for questions. And it's a real short story. When I was 11, we went up to Fallon, Nevada. That's where Francis Allen, a Northern Paiute Indian, my dad's best friend, he was in the Marines with my pop. And I was named after Francis Allen. We went to meet him. We pulled into Fallon, Nevada in 1962. It was a small town in northern Nevada. And we pulled onto Main Street. And I walked into this store as my pop went to go and try and find someone that knew directions to where Francis Allen lived. And I walked into this store on Main Street in Fallon, Nevada, probably a town of about 3,000 or 4,000 people at the time. And I walk up to the counter and I put an RC Cola on the counter, because that's what I drank back then. It's the best cola that there is. And the cashier, who was white, looks at me up and down. He goes, "You're not from around here, are you, boy?" I go, "No, I'm from Hanford, California, sir. My parents taught me to be polite." He goes, "Well, look, let me give you some advice while you're here in Fallon so you don't get in trouble. And I think he was honestly just giving me advice. He wasn't, talking down to me too much. And he was just giving me advice to survive in Fallon, Nevada. We were right on Main Street. The door of the store was open. He goes, if you're going to be in here in Fallon, Nevada, you need to know that this side of the street that you're on, that's the cowboy side of town. And then he pointed across the street. He said, across the street over there, that's the Indian side of town. I looked out the door of the store, and across the street, all the people look like me, were brown. And I thought, all right, thank you. And what I was thinking was, in Hanford, we were like the only Indian family there. I'm in a town where we have our own side of the street. I'm in Indian heaven. So that's a little insight into how I was raised. If you have questions about the Chumash, the Tataviam, if I really was a bad little boy, ask away.
So now's your opportunity to ask a question or give a comment. Okay, so we're opening it up to you for the next couple of minutes, students.
I do have a question. I'm not too familiar with the Nevada area. So where does that city around, where in Nevada does that lie? Like towards the north side or?
It's north of Reno.
North of Reno.
So the Paiute tribe is kind of split into northern Paiute and southern Paiute. Southern Paiute goes all the ways down by Mammoth and into California. The northern Paiute are from Lake Tahoe and that area north. So the towns north of Reno are pretty small, even today. And there was an Indian school up there. I forget the name of it, but my namesake, Francis Allen, actually went to an Indian boarding school when he was a young man. Apparently was quite the athlete.
You said you don't recall the name of the boarding school he attended?
I found out later in life, my father didn't tell me a lot about Francis Allen. I only met him that once. And it shows you what a small world we have. I do storytelling at the Santa Ynez Powwow, which is every year in October. And I've been their storyteller for over 15 years. And about 5 years ago, they brought in another storyteller. So there'd be two of us. So we can kind of take turns and I'd get a break every now and then. And the storyteller they brought in, a wonderful lady, was a Northern Paiute from that same area. And when I was telling her this story about I was named after Francis Allen, her eyes got real big. And she grew up with Francis Allen. He was her neighbor.
Oh, wow.
And she grew up with Francis Allen's daughters and Francis Allen's wife and the storyteller, Sandy's mom. They were best friends. So they were like best friends and neighbors. And she knew what Indian school, and she actually brought me pictures of him when he was a young man. So I found out a lot about him just within the last 5 years. For the life of me, I just can't remember. Sherman is the Indian school here in Southern California. I can't remember what the one is up there. But sometimes they weren't very nice, the Indian schools.
And I have a question about the Indian schools. What do you think the main purpose for those schools were?
If it wasn't for the Sherman Indian School, I would still be here. I would have a different grandfather. We don't know a lot about my grandfather, Manuel Salazar. We know he was native, tribal. He was originally born in Texas. And when he was a little boy, the family moved to California, actually settled in Oxnard, a lot of them. He got sent to Sherman Indian School in the early 1900s. And the Indian schools were set up for one purpose. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs was set up for one purpose. If they couldn't kill us and defeat us in war, their second goal was to get rid of the Indian in the Indian. So they tried to make us assimilate and become white. So they cut our hair. We weren't allowed to speak our language. So I would have probably had a different grandfather. My name wouldn't be Salazar probably. My grandmother is where I get my Chumash and Tataviam side. But my grandfather ran away from the Sherman Indian School because they treated the kids so mean, so poorly. They whipped and beat him on a fairly regular basis. So when he was a teenager, he ran away and settled in San Fernando and started working in construction. Met my grandmother, and the rest is history.
It was interesting that you mentioned how the Indian school's purpose was to basically whitewash Native Americans. And in the last session, you had shared that on a birth certificate, it said white, and no one ever, for a Native American, and no one ever questioned it. So do you think that putting that on a birth certificate was also part of the plan to wash out people's indigeneity and their relationship to the land? Because I know a lot of people have on their birth certificate white when they're actually not white, even for us Mexicans. So y'all check your birth certificate, because mine says white and I'm Mexican. So check your birth certificate. But what do you think the intent behind that was?
Yeah, I think it's definitely they didn't want to acknowledge the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the U.S. government thought that Native peoples would assimilate, and they just underestimated our will to stay connected to our tribal land and our tribal ways. So it kind of shows you the evolution. When you can use the Sherman Indian School, and it's probably what happened there happened to almost every Indian school. Sherman Indian School today has a waiting list, and tribal people they're lucky to get their kids into the Sherman Indian School, because now it's run by mostly tribal people. The teachers are tribal. But it was originally started to force us to not be tribal, to become Christians, to become U.S. citizens. So yeah, putting on birth certificates, they're just put Caucasian. They wanted us to assimilate. And like I said, it just hasn't worked out. They underestimated how strongly we are connected to the land. I tell people all the time, I was born in my tribal territory. I will die in my tribal territory.
Do you know how you said that the Sherman School has changed so that it has Indians teaching now? Do you know like what type of things they do to try to preserve the culture, what they teach in the school to make sure that the culture lives on and to pass traditions down?
We do it here in Ventura County too. Ventura County is one of the few that has Indian Ed, and we're thinking about changing the name to Ventura County Indigenous Education. But they teach about the history and culture of as many tribes as they can. They have classes that teach traditional cultural crafts, activities. They have a powwow, they have gatherings, they do ceremonies. I'm not sure if they have sweat lodges there, but they incorporate, along with, math, science, reading, and the things that are typically taught in public schools and high schools. So they get them ready for college, but they also incorporate traditional tribal cultural lessons and things like that. So one thing I hope to do is, as your teacher mentioned, I'm a traditional storyteller, and I tell traditional stories. And I want to start having teaching workshops where I'm teaching storytelling, how to tell a story. And I think it's extremely important is how we passed on our wisdom and knowledge. But I think storytelling is something that all of us need to learn. And I'll talk a little bit more about it a little bit later, and why the significance and importance of storytelling. More comments, questions?
I have a question. So what kind of activities take place at the powwows?
There are certain similarities. There might be little differences at different powwows. The Northwest tribes more is focused on what is called potlatch. So in the Northwest tribes, a large part of the powwow and their ceremony is giving gifts. Sharing and giving gifts is a large part of their ceremony. Down here in California, most powwows are pretty similar. Traditional songs, traditional dance, or at least dance in the style of what was their tradition. And then the vendors, hopefully, some sneak in and some are a little bit kind of questionable, but we try as best as possible that the art and crafts are native made. So when I go to a powwow and I do storytelling, I still usually take some things that I've made. And I'm not a great crafts person. I'm better at building big things like traditional houses, canoes, but I'll make some clapper sticks, which are rhythm instruments, gourd rattles, seaweed rattles, and decorate them using abalone and things like that, traditional things, deer hoof rattles. But it's to kind of encourage the old way of gathering. When we had gatherings 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, they were to share songs, stories, to sit and gossip. The men would gather to talk about the women would gather to talk about the men. Some things never change. And then to do some trading. So the barter system was how we survived. So you would bring your finest deer hides, your finest rabbit skins, whatever your skill was. I believe very strongly that we all have a gift and we all have a dream. And many of us have several gifts and several dreams. So in the tribal cultures, it's a large part of the culture to figure out what everyone's gift is, and then to encourage them and help them fulfill that gift, that strength. So the adults, the elders, it was their responsibility to watch everybody. So if we were sitting in the village right now and we were sitting around the fire and I'm telling these stories, I'd be watching all of you. Who's the natural leader? Who's a basket weaver? Who's a canoe builder? Who's a great hunter? Who's a great runner? Who's strong? Who's loving and tender and giving? Those are all important qualities to have, and we all have strengths and weaknesses, and we believe in order to succeed, I have to help all of you figure out what your strength is, and then utilize that strength to the fullest, and then that will help all of us.
I have a question. You mentioned that you, when it came to the arts and crafts, you weren't so great at the small stuff, but more so the building the bigger stuff. But do you happen to have any of the crafts you've made, the small crafts around you?
Yeah, hold on.
I'm just curious.
Oh. So I like going up to Morro Bay and Cambria, and one thing they have at Morro Bay is bull kelp seaweed. When it comes out of the ocean, bull kelp seaweed, the bulb part is about that big around, about as big as a softball, and it has a tail that's 12, 15 feet long. But when it loses all the water that's in it and it shrinks up, it gets much smaller and it's hard. And it has this that looks like hair. And this is one that I'm just starting to work on. And this is one that I've kind of pretty well finished. So I've got some abalone right there that I've put into it. It has a bear paw on that side and kind of a Chumash style sun symbol on that side. I've painted the handle. I put a little base on it so it can stand up. So they're simple. A rhythm instrument is a clapper stick. So this is elderberry. It's called a split stick. As you can see, I split it down the center. Elderberry has a soft core center that's easy to hollow out. So you hollow out the center and you split it. This one's probably almost 2 feet long, and it keeps the rhythm of the song. But it's a simple rhythm instrument. So I'll decorate this one a little bit more. Right now I just have it basic red with a few dots on it. So I'll put a swordfish, maybe a dolphin or something along in there, and then put a coat of varnish on it, and it's simple. I tried basket weaving one time. Chumash basket weavers are some of the greatest basket weavers anywhere in the world. Chumash baskets are in museums all around the world. So when the Russians came, they saw Chumash baskets, they bought up a whole bunch of them, took them back to Russia. So there's museums in Russia that have Chumash baskets in them. There's Chumash baskets in France, Germany, England, Australia. They're all around the world, Japan. And I tried basket weaving one time, and after about a 5-hour class, everyone had round, flat, disc-like baskets weaved about that big. One person had one that big. One person had a basket about the base about that big and had already started weaving up about 3 inches. I had about a dollar-sized little coil. Basket weaving is extremely difficult, and you have to do all this little intricate stuff, and my little fat fingers just, I can make clapper sticks and rattles, gourd rattles, but what I enjoy the most, I've made 3 or 4 traditional houses. In the Tataviam language, they're called Kich. It's K-I-J, but it's pronounced Kich. In the Chumash language, it's the same house. They're made with willow and thatched and covered with bulrush tule. And they're called the Ap. That's the Chumash word. I've built the canoes for the last 20 years. And the Chumash word for canoe is tumul. And we're famous for our canoes.
Oh, wow. That's really, really big.
So, but I just enjoy making big things. Jessica, do you have a question?
Yeah. So like those canoes that you work with, do you have a team, like, or was it just on your own, like doing stuff like that?
Maybe 60 to 70 active paddlers, mostly Chumash, but we reach out to anyone that's a person of the ocean. So we have non-Chumash people paddle with us. It's kind of hit and miss. We're not that organized. We didn't put any of our canoes in the water this year because of COVID-19. History is not dugouts. They're literally, we take boards and we glue them together and glue and tie them. They're flat bottom. So that 32-foot canoe does not have a frame. It does not have one single metal screw or metal nail. It's literally glued and tied together. We built them for about 3,000 years, stopped building them by the 1830s. The Chumash were not building their canoes anymore because of the mission period. In 1912, Fernando Labrado built one to show the locals here in Ventura and Santa Barbara how we used to build them. In 1976, they built a Tamol, a plank canoe for the bicentennial, but it was only used 3 or 4 times. So in 1997, we built a 24-foot plank canoe, and in 2001, we paddled from Oxnard, Channel Islands Harbor, over to Anacapa, took some photographs, and then paddled on to Limu, the island that we call Santa Cruz Island, and we've done that 12 times. So in modern times, 2001 was the first time a traditional Chumash canoe, and I was in that first crew, and we put paddlers in and out. So we take, after the paddlers paddle for about 2-3 hours, our canoes are very deep. They're a good 2 feet deep. Flat bottom canoes are very tippy. They'll rock back and forth. So you put sandbags or ballast in the bottom of your flat bottom canoe. That gets some of your canoe underwater. You want to get about that much underwater, and it stabilizes it, so it's not as tippy. But they're very heavy. So the 24-footer, we put 350 pounds of sandbags in the bottom. We're actually on our knees kneeling. Our paddles are over 11 feet long. Takes a lot of upper body strength. So we don't have set crews. We kind of change and just find people that paddle well together. I have about 10, 12 people that I enjoy paddling with. And to show you how slow our canoes are, we average around 2 to 3 miles an hour. That's it. Unless thunder and lightning are in the Tamale, then we go 4 miles an hour. Rudy, you like that, didn't you, buddy? Rudy looks, that's a paddler right there. I want to get you in a Tamale, young man.
I'm down.
Probably, we have women paddlers too, so I'm looking at who might be a possible woman paddler. You can never tell. The thin, spry ones sometimes are the best paddlers. So if you want to come and paddle with us, stay in touch with your teacher. We'll start next summer, I hope.
Sounds good. I'll let you know.
All right, Rudy. Thank you. Should I go into the next little 15-minute section?
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you want to elaborate or talk about the missing a Native American woman?
Oh, the lone woman of San Nicolas.
Yes.
Sure. Actually, I was going to give you the kind of the history, a little bit more detailed history of about the maritime culture, the Tamale. But the lone woman of San Nicolas, her true story is what happened to tribal people in Southern California and along the coast. The true story is the Russians and the English, Spanish a little bit, but mostly the Russians and the English were fighting for control of the fur trade along the coast of California. The fur trade in the 1700s and early 1800s was extremely valuable, brought in millions and millions of dollars. And the sea otter fur trade was extremely valuable. And the reason is sea otter capes were very fashionable for wealthy women in Europe in the 1700s and 1800s. If you were a wealthy woman in Europe, one sign was not a mink coat, it was a sea otter coat or cape. And the sea otters were plentiful along the coast of California. The Russians were brutal. And because the Chumash and the Gabrielino Tongva are the tribe from Los Angeles, Long Beach, San Pedro, in that area, and there, Catalina Island, San Nicolas Island, built ocean canoes and also hunted sea lion and sea otters. It was also a sign of status within those two tribes. If a woman had a sea otter cape, she was someone important. She was a chief. We had women chiefs back then too, so we had both men and women. Our women were leaders. It wasn't unusual. And if you were a woman leader in sea otters, so the Russians started killing off the Chumash men in our canoes. They started killing off the Gabrielino Tongva men in their canoes because they both hunted sea lions and sea otters. And our population started dropping dramatically along with, at that same time, the missions and all those diseases they brought. So our populations were dropping dramatically. Every island, Catalina, San Clemente, San Nicolas, those are Gabrielino Islands, Tongva Islands, and then the Chumash, Anacapa, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, San Miguel. Those 4 islands were Chumash. They all had, in the early 1700s, around anywhere from 300 to 800 people living, tribal people living on the island. They lived off of clams, abalone, fishing, sea otter, and sea lions. So the Russians and English started killing them all off. Then the missions came and brought smallpox and chickenpox and enslaved us. They were bringing Indians off the islands to work at the missions. So the populations dropped dramatically. What the mission priests realized this, that was their workforce. They go, hey, we can't have the Russians and the English killing off our slave labor. Let's go out and bring them all back. So all the missions, San Gabriel, Ventura, Santa Barbara, out schooners. Lots of times they were trappers and fur traders, Spanish, and they would send them out and say, hey, when you're out there hunting the sea otter and the sea lions, will you bring back any of the Indians that are left so they won't be killed, and then they can live at the missions and they would have slave laborers. So that happened. Anacapa didn't have any villages. It's a very small island if you've ever been there. But Santa Cruz got down to about 40. They brought the last 40 in. Santa Rosa, same thing, got down to the last 30 or 40. They sent out a boat, brought in the last 30 or 40. Same thing with San Miguel. Catalina, it was a little bit larger population. They brought in the last 70 or 80. San Clemente, the same thing. San Nicolas being the farthest island out, it's where the Russian fur traders had actually set up camp. They had several skirmishes and fights with the Indian people that lived on San Nicolas Island. There was one battle where they believed the Russians and their crew, which was mostly Inuit Indians from Alaska, killed several hundred of the Indian people on San Nicolas. The early reports, it used to be the story when it was told in the 70s and 80s and 90s, was that the boat was sent out to get the last 30 or 40, but they've been researching it and they're finding out more accurate information. Today, they believe that when they sent that boat out, there was probably maybe about 12 to 15. That was it. The rest of the tribal people on San Nicolas Island had been killed. They sent a boat out to get the last 12 to 15. They're still not 100% sure. They think she stayed behind. There is a possibility that she got on the boat with the other 15 people and that she jumped overboard as the boat was leaving. It was a real high surf. Storm was coming in, and they never saw her on shore. So if she did jump over and swim, no one saw her on shore. If she got left behind, she just got left behind. But they think she either swam back or stayed on purpose, hid, because a young child got left behind. They're not quite sure who the young child was, but now they have found out one woman stayed on the island or jumped overboard and swam back. So for the first 5 to 8 years, they think she was on the island with a young child, either a son of hers, a nephew, or a family member, or just a tribal member that got left behind, but probably a family member. So probably her son or a nephew or a cousin, boy, was left behind, and she stayed there with that little boy. Now they have found out that she did talk and communicate with some of the other dozen people that were taken off and went back during those 12 years that she lived, 18 years. She lived 18 years on that island, pretty much by herself or with that young boy. But fairly early on, she says someone went back out that could speak her language, and we just found out maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that uh, uh, she told one of her tribal members that the young boy was eaten by a sea monster. So, considering myth and legend, probably what happened, the young boy was swimming in the ocean or was out fishing or diving for abalone, and he probably got attacked by a shark. That's the most popular theory today. But they're pretty sure for the last few years, probably the last 10 years, she lived on the island by herself. When they sent a crew out to find her, they looked around, they felt they were being watched, but they didn't find her. They came back out a month later, searched the island again, same thing. They felt they were being watched. They found evidence of someone living there, various stone tools hidden in bush and brush and stuff, small, simple little structures, shade structures, but no house. The third time they went, they found the lone woman. All the island people domesticated what they believe might have either been a cross between coyotes and fox, or they just domesticated some of the wild fox that lived on the islands. So in the story, The Island Blue Dolphin, when they say the wild dogs, those were probably island fox that the tribal people trained and domesticated. They would use them to hunt sea lion. So they would send the domesticated coyote fox dogs to chase the sea lions. And when the sea lions would run from them, then the hunters wouldn't be seen and they could harpoon the sea lions. So those were actually domesticated dogs. Almost all California Indians had domesticated dogs, and they were interbred between the fox, coyote, sometimes possibly coyote wolf, and then they domesticated them, raised them, and then interbred them themselves, and they became domesticated. And they were used for hunting. So the third time they found her, they brought her back to Santa Barbara because the ship that was sent out was based out of Santa Barbara. This is the way I was told the story. And this is an example of what happened to most California Indians. She was brought back to Santa Barbara, even though she didn't speak any Chumash languages. So when she was brought back, she was approximately 50 years old, they estimate, and in perfect health. A strong, healthy woman that had lived out on the island. And they recently, about 5 years ago, found a very large cave with a lot of her tools in them. So they believe she was living in this large cave that was over 10 feet wide and over 50 feet long and depth, a very big cave. And when they brought her to Santa Barbara, the native people there were Chumash. They didn't speak Gabrielino, Tonga languages. So she really couldn't communicate very well. She had never eaten the foods that they were eating there. She lived on abalone and sea lion meat and a few plants that grew on the islands, a few berries and a few vegetable types, lettuces and wild lettuces, things like that. Very simple plants, rhodea, blue dick roots and things like that. They brought her here and they changed her diet 100%. Beans, rice, beef, poultry, pork. Her stomach just couldn't take that. She didn't like the meats. She didn't like the beans and rice. They say there were many days that all she ate was oranges. Any of us, if we stop eating the foods we normally eat, and all of a sudden we have 20 oranges, that's all we eat for the day, you're going to be going to the bathroom quite a lot. She got dysentery and fell ill. She was staying with the family, the Diver family, which was a very wealthy family in Santa Barbara at the time. A very wealthy white family. That was 1850. somewhere in the 1850s, like 1855, 1857, somewhere around there. So they changed her diet. No one spoke her language. If you can imagine being removed from where you've lived your whole life, where your people have lived for thousands of years. Now you're living in strange buildings, eating strange food. No one speaks your language. They're trying to tell you about this religion. It's called Christian. It's called Catholic. And they're trying to tell you about this man, Jesus, and about his mother, the Virgin Mary. But they're telling it in a language that you don't understand. And then she got sick with dysentery. And she was on her deathbed, but she was living with a very wealthy family. So if you can imagine, what family can I use today? You know, if I came down out of the mountains and I but the Kardashians took me in. One, I'm screwed already. But they're a very, very wealthy family. And as I'm on my deathbed and I'm getting ready to die, the Kardashians get on their cell phone and they ask the Padre to come to give me my last rites. And the Padre walks in and he sees this Indian and he says, and this is what happened in Santa Barbara with the Nidiver family. The Nidiver family realized that the lone woman was getting ready to die and she wasn't going to make it through the night. And they sent to the mission, for the mission priest in 1855, 1857, whenever it was, when there were bounties on California Indians. She came back at the very worst time. They were killing California Indians for $5 and $10 bounties. No one spoke her language. They changed her diet, and they tried to explain this religion that she couldn't understand because she didn't speak their language. And the priest walked in to give this woman her last rites. And when he saw who it was, he says, I can't give her her last rites. She's not a Catholic. And it took the Nidiver family, a very wealthy, influential family in Santa Barbara, a long time, they say about almost an hour of discussion with the Padre to convince him to give her her last rites. And they said they finally convinced him that, you know, she hadn't rejected the Catholic religion. No one spoke her language. She doesn't speak English. She doesn't speak Spanish. And he reluctantly said, well, okay, I'll baptize her. And by baptizing her, then she becomes a Catholic. And then I can give her her last rites. And he baptized her and he christened her and gave her the name Juana Maria that she never knew, never understood. She was in a coma getting ready to die. And he gave her her last rites, and they say she died moments after she was given her last rites. What happened to Juana Maria, what happened to the lone woman of San Nicolas, happened to over 200,000 California Indians. No one took the time to understand our language, our culture, our beliefs, our ways. We had to become Catholics. We had to become Christians. And we did. We became good Catholics. We became good Christians. We learned Spanish. We learned English. We became citizens of Spain. We became citizens of Mexico. And we became citizens of the United States. And it didn't help us when we became any of them. We were treated as second-class citizens by all of them. Who knows about the bounty system? I will talk about that after questions and comments in the last 15 minutes. How much time do I have? Ooh.
Yeah, this session ends at 5:45, so we have about 15 minutes left if you want to go ahead and jump in there.
Does anyone have any comments or questions before I jump into the bounty system? It's a pretty heavy time. Okay, does anyone know about the bounty system in California? What was the bounty system in California? Okay. In 1850, our very first governor, Governor Burnett, proclaimed he was going to exterminate all California Indians. If you want to read about this, there is a book. Your teacher knows about it, you can ask her, but it's called American Genocide. Even though it's titled American Genocide, it's about what happened to California Indians. The very first governor proclaimed he was going to exterminate all California Indians. And he came up with a method. And the reason he did that is the reason why we were enslaved at the missions, the reasons why we were indentured servants in California, is we were labeled as savages. We were subhuman. We were not your equals. I'm not equal to you guys. I'm less than. I'm inferior. There's no way if I get to the best Alan Salazar, I'm still inferior to all of you. I was inferior to the Spanish. I was inferior to the Mexicans. I was inferior to the US citizens. So that justified them coming up with the bounty system. It was just easier to kill all of us, and then the Indian problem would be gone. So they did it two ways. They got over $1 million from the US government, and that was used to hire to kill California Indians. The militia, that was their only job. There was no other job they had. We weren't being attacked by Russia. We weren't being attacked by Spain or Mexico. We weren't being attacked by England. The militia had one job: to kill California Indians. They were the highest paid militia in all of the United States at that time. So, let me put this in perspective. The gold rush started in 1848. Over 100,000 young men, strong young men, thought they were going to come out and find gold and be wealthy and rich. Very few of them found gold. So now there's this large workforce of young, strong men. The governor realized that. He got $1 million so he could pay them a very high salary. And they had one job: to kill California Indians. They, along with some vigilante groups, so what's going on today with far right and KKK and right-wing extremists, they started from the California bounty system out here on the West Coast. Many of them came from Oregon, where they were extremely racist. And Oregon was established with a racist agenda. You could not marry a person of color if you were white. It was illegal. And those people from Oregon came down to California, and they were the militia, and they were vigilantes. The militia and the vigilantes executed thousands of California Indians. There were over 300 different Indian massacres where they went in and wiped out whole villages. There are only a handful of tribal accounts of these massacres because they wiped out literally, but there are a few accounts. I'm debating right now, my little pea brain, how much I could tell you, but there's one of a Pomo young girl, 12 years old, that saw her whole family killed by the militia, and saw her infant little sister, I believe, or brother, that was less than a year old, killed and dismembered. And she hid in the tule, in the brush. They lived by a lake, and she ran in and hid in the tule, and was the only survivor. And then was interviewed and told the horrific story that held the heart of her little sister as the soldiers left, and she hid. And she watched her whole family brutally murdered. The native population dropped from 140,000 when California was a state in 1850 to less than 20,000. Many experts believe the whole population to the whole state after the bounty system was less than 15,000. In Southern California, there weren't as many massacres because we were enslaved. We were the workforce. My great-grandfather was an indentured servant for, we believe, at least 2 or 3 years to the McClay family in San Fernando. Like many racist political leaders, they were extremely deceptive, but extremely brutal. So in California, we had what was called, at that same time in the 1850s, they established the Indian Protection Act. Sounds like it's a bill or act to protect California Indians. It was a bill to enslave California Indians. So California settlers could claim any Indian child that they believed was from an indigent family, from a family that was homeless, not able to take care of themselves. They would go to Indian families and go, we're going to take all your kids and they're ours. And they had legal right to keep those children until they were 18. So they would get 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids and keep them and use them as farm laborers and ranch hands until they became adults. Because we had no legal rights, we couldn't go to court and testify. Many of them were kept well until they were in their 20s as indentured servants. They didn't like using the word slave. But you could actually go into downtown Los Angeles in the 1850s and the early 1860s and buy indentured servants, Indian indentured servants. So if they could say Alan Salazar is homeless, he doesn't have a job, he doesn't have any way of taking care of himself, he doesn't own a house, he's living down by the river the way homeless people do today. They would be able to round up all the homeless people today, servants, because they're indigent, they're homeless. And they would have to work for that family, that landowner, that rancher, that farmer, for whatever time was determined by the courts. So the courts would go, oh, well, it's going to take at least 4 or 5 years for that person to get back on their feet. So that man and woman right there are your indentured servant. The Indian Protection Act did not protect one single Indian. It was law to make us slaves. That's the early California history. It's still difficult, as you can see, for me to talk about that. I recently had a wonderful group. If I was able to figure out how to also bring up my emails, well, I guess I could do it on my phone. But it's a Catholic group that actually works to help correct injustices within the Catholic Church. And we know many of them. They're fairly public now, but they've reached out to me to help me and my tribe. We have an awful relationship with the San Fernando Mission priests. And Father Serra told us when he established the missions that if we became good Catholics and citizens of Spain, then we would get our land back. We haven't gotten 1 acre back. So there's actually a group that's trying to reach out, not so much to get some of the land back. That's at the top of the list pipe dream, but just to get some of the other injustices corrected. So it's, and I met with them like this last, and explained the bounty system. And I told them, I appreciate whatever you can do, but I can't sit down with a meeting at San Fernando Mission with me and with the Padre from the San Fernando Mission. It's too difficult for me to go to the San Fernando Mission. I've gone there a few times in my adult life, and I can't do it. It's too hard. So the emotional wounds, the trauma, the scars, we're a long way from healing. So I was talking about civil rights. I'll close before I open up for some questions and comments. When it comes to civil rights in America, in my opinion, and I may be wrong, I only went to Bakersfield Junior College, so it's not like I have a master's or a PhD. I come from a working class family, and I've worked my whole life. But in my opinion, tribal people in America, we're at the bottom. We're on the lowest rung of the ladder. So all the other ethnic groups usually get acknowledged, will get their issues addressed before we will. So that's why when this civil unrest started, Black Lives Matter, which I support 100%, but we realized this is our opportunity to address some of our social injustice, some of the atrocities against tribal people in America. And we've always waited for, when we saw Cesar Chavez, I had the honor, my father met Cesar Chavez. We were living in Bakersfield and Delano. My father met Cesar Chavez and came home, and I remember him telling me, he says, I had lunch today with Cesar Chavez. He had a friend that lived in Delano, California. He goes, man, he says, and my dad wasn't a political person at all. He never even voted in any election. He goes, I was really very impressed. He said, what a wonderful man. He says, so well spoken. He's doing some really, really important things, Alan. And I was like, I was your age. I was in high school. I'm like, wow, you met Cesar Chavez? Yeah. And we've always waited for the Cesar Chavez's, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, and then Native peoples go, okay, maybe now some of our issues will be addressed. And in my opinion, we're like that. But we're making strides. Don't ever count us out. Comments and questions, please. I've talked way too much.
We're actually a minute over our time, so unfortunately we don't have time to go back and forth with questions and answers. But I do want to ask of you super quickly if there's anything that, any call to action that students can participate in to help address the social justice issues that Native American folks are dealing with today. Anything
My Fernandino Tataviam tribe is under review to get federally recognized. The government doesn't even recognize my tribe. We're not an official tribe, and there's a whole big review process. So any of you can send an email to any politician, a congressperson in Washington, D.C., a representative from where you live, any of the senators. Kamala Harris would be great. Find out what Kamala Harris's email is, and then send her a letter saying you support this tribe, Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. And if you can't write that down fast enough, your teacher will have this, and send an email to any politician saying you support us getting federally recognized. If we can get federally recognized, it will change. It won't help me. I'll be 70 years old in a few months, so it's not going to help me, but it's going to help my kids and my grandson. It will help all our young tribal members that are your age right now. It will change their lives dramatically. One, the federal government will recognize the Fernandino Tataviam, that we're still here and we are a tribe. I'm pretty sure I'm still here. Any letters of support, send an email, please. And other than if you see me on Main Street in downtown Ventura, I drink tea, so you can buy me a hot Earl Grey at Starbucks, or I have chicken tacos on Taco Tuesday, every Tuesday at Snapper Jack's.
Thank you so much again for your time and for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and all the stories with us, Alan. Thank you so very much. Students, if any of you want to take this on as one of your agents of change activities, and all you have to do is find Kamala Harris's email address and maybe put together a simple email template that folks can, just kind of type in their own info so that they can send it, and we can just start sharing that and get people to send it into her email. If anybody wants to take that on, please let me know, and that can be one of your agents of change activities that you fulfill. Okay, but this is what I mean about putting your agency into work and actually making things happen. Okay, so it's not just wishful thinking, someday somebody somewhere will eventually address this. No, it has to be us today, right now. We have to do it ourselves. Okay, y'all. So thank you, everybody, for being great participants. Alan, thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure to share this space with you, and we'll be in touch. Okay. All right.
Thank you all very much. Tristan,
You.
I would kill for that hair. That's a beautiful head of hair, young man. I tell a story about
I like your hair as well, though.
Enjoy it while you have it. As you get older, it gets thinner. Even yours will turn gray one of these days. You guys have a blessed evening. Thank you very much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.